The insatiable will always find a way to detain its creatures in life and compel them to live on, by means of an illusion spread over things. Knowledge kills action, for action requires a state of being in which we are covered with the veil of illusion. It is only as an aesthetic phenomenon that existence and the world are eternally justified. One has to take a somewhat bold and dangerous line with this existence, especially as, whatever happens, we are bound to lose it. Amazingly, the most obvious question fails to occur to our scholars. What is their work, their hurry, their painful frenzy supposed to be for? A few hours' mountain climbing make of a rogue and a saint to fairly equal creatures. Admiration for a quality or an art can be so strong that it deters us from striving to possess it. Pity is the most agreeable feeling among those who have little pride and no prospects of great conquests. The creation of freedom for oneself and is sacred no even to duty. For that, my brothers, the lion is needed. I say unto you, one must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. I say unto you, you still have chaos in yourselves. Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. And when you look long into an abyss, the abyss also looks into you. The thought of suicide is a great consolation. By means of it one gets successfully through many a bad night. A human being who strives for something great considers everyone he meets on his way either as a means or as a delay and obstacle, or as a temporary resting place. I did that, says my memory. I could not have done that, says my pride, and remains inexorable. Eventually the memory yields. Sensuality often hastens the growth of love so much that the roots remain weak and are easily torn up. Every great philosophy so far has been the personal confession of its author and a kind of involuntary and unconscious memoir. When stepped on, the worm curls up. That is a clever thing to do. Thus it reduces its chances of being stepped on again, in the language of morality, humility. Sin, this supreme form of human self-desecration, was invented to block science, to block culture, to block every elevation and ennoblement of humanity. The priests rule through the invention of sin. We labor at our daily work, more ardently and thoughtlessly, and is necessary to sustain our life because it is even more necessary not to have leisure to stop and think. Haste is universal because everyone is in flight from himself. Consider the cattle, grazing as they pass you by. They do not know what is meant by yesterday or today. They leap about, eat, rest, digest, leap about again, and so from morn till night and from day to day, fettered to the moment and its pleasure or displeasure. And thus neither melancholy nor bore. This is a hard sight for man to see. For, though he thinks himself better than the animals because he is human, he cannot help envying them their happiness. What they have, a life neither bored nor painful, is precisely what he wants. Yet he cannot have it because he refuses to be like an animal. Every tradition grows ever more venerable. The more remote its origin, the more confused that origin is. The reverence due to it increases from generation to generation. The tradition finally becomes holy and inspires awe. Wherever there is madness, there is also a grain of genius and wisdom. All superior men, who are irresistibly drawn to throw off the yoke of any kind of morality and to frame new laws had, if they were not actually mad, no alternative but to make themselves, or pretend to be mad. All these bold birds who fly out into the widest open, it is true. At some point they will not be able to fly any farther and will squat down on some pylon or sparse crag and very grateful for this miserable accommodation to boot. But who would want to conclude from this that there was no longer a vast and prodigious trajectory ahead of them, that they had flown as far and wide as one could fly? All our great mentors and precursors have finally come to a stop. And it is hardly the noblest and most graceful of gestures with which fatigue comes to a stop. It will also happen to you and me. Of what concern, however, is that to you and me, other birds will fly farther. I want to learn more and more to see as beautiful what is necessary in things. Then I shall be one of those who make things beautiful. A more haughty love of fate, let that be my love henceforth. I do not want to wage war against what is ugly. I do not want to accuse. I do not even want to accuse those who accuse. Looking away shall be my only negation. And all in all and on the whole, someday I wish to be only a yes-sayer. Looking for work in order to be paid. In civilized countries today, almost all men are at one in doing that. For all of them work is a means and not an end in itself. Hence they are not very refined in their choice of work, if only it pays well, but there are, if only rarely, men who would rather perish than work without any pleasure in their work. They are choosy, hard to satisfy, and do not care for ample rewards, if the work itself is not to be the reward of rewards. Artists and contemplative men of all kinds belong to this rare breed, but so do even those men of leisure who spend their lives hunting, traveling, or in love affairs and adventures. All of these desire work and misery only if it is associated with pleasure, and the hardest, most difficult work if necessary, otherwise their idleness is resolute, even if it spells impoverishment, dishonor, and danger to life and limb. They do not fear boredom as much as work without pleasure. Keeping up appearances, living in borrowed finery, wearing masks, the drapery of convention, play acting for the benefit of others and oneself, the constant fluttering of human beings around the one flame of vanity, so much the rule and the law, that there is virtually nothing which defies understanding so much as the fact that an honest and pure drive towards truth should ever have emerged in them. They are deeply immersed in illusions and dream images. Their eyes merely glide across the surface of things and see forms. Nowhere does their perception lead to truth. God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? From such abysses, from such severe sickness, one must return newborn, having shed one's skin, more ticklish and malicious, with a more delicate taste for joy, with a tenderer tongue for all good things, with merrier senses, with a second dangerous innocence in joy, more childlike and yet 100 times subtler than one has ever been before. To give style to one's character, a great and rare art. It is practiced by those who survey all the strengths and weaknesses that their nature has to offer and then fit them into an artistic plan until each appears as art and reason and even weaknesses delight the eye. Here a great mass of second nature has been added. There a piece of first nature removed, both times through long practice and daily work at it. Here the ugly that could not be removed is concealed. There it is reinterpreted into sublimity. Much that is vague and resisted shaping has been saved and employed for distant views that is supposed to beckon towards the remote and immense. In the end, when the work is complete, it becomes clear how it was the force of a single taste that ruled and shaped everything great and small. The brilliance shall be the meaning of the earth. I entreat you, my brethren, remain true to the earth, and do not believe those who speak to you of superterrestrial hopes. Behold, I teach you the brilliance, he is this lightning, he is this madness, behold. I am a prophet of the lightning and a heavy drop from the cloud, but this lightning is called brilliance. Independence is for the very few, it is a privilege of the strong. And whoever attempts it even with the best right but without inner constraint proves that he is probably not only strong, but also daring to the point of recklessness. He enters into a labyrinth. He multiplies 1,000-fold dangers which life brings with it in any case, not the least of which is that no one can see how and where he loses his way, becomes lonely, and is torn piecemeal by some minotaur of conscience, supposing one like that comes to grief. This happens so far from the comprehension of men that they neither feel it nor sympathize, and he cannot go back any longer. More and more it seems to me that the philosopher, being of necessity a man of tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, has always found himself, and had to find himself, in contradiction to his today. His enemy was ever the ideal of today. So far all these extraordinary furtherers of men whom one calls philosophers, though they themselves have rarely felt like friends of wisdom but rather like disagreeable fools and dangerous question marks, have found their task, their hard, unwanted, inescapable task, but eventually also the greatness of their task, in being the bad conscience of their time. One must shed the bad taste of wanting to agree with many. Good is no longer go when one's neighbor mouths it, and how should there be a common go? The term contradicts itself. Whatever can be common always has little value. In the end it must be as it is and always has been. Great things remain for the great, abysses for the profound, nuances and shudders for the refined, and, in brief, all that is rare for the rare. Particularly as knowers, let us not be ungrateful toward such resolute reversals of the familiar perspectives and valuations with which the spirit has raged against itself all too long. To see differently in this way for once, to want to see differently, is no small discipline and preparation of the intellect for its future objectivity. The latter are understood not as disinterested contemplation, which is a non-concept and absurdity, but rather as the capacity to have one's pro and contra in one's power, and to shift them in and out, so that one knows how to make precisely the difference in perspectives and affective interpretations useful for knowledge. Those who can breathe the air of my writings know that it is an air of the heights, a strong air. One must be made for it. Otherwise there is no small danger that one might catch cold in it. The ice is near, the solitude tremendous, but how calmly all things lie in the light. How freely one breathes, how much one feels beneath oneself. And do you know what the world is to me? This world, a monster of energy, without beginning, without end, set in a definite space as a definite force, and not a space that might be empty here or there, but rather as force throughout, as a play of forces and waves of forces, at the same time one and many, increasing here and at the same time decreasing here. This world is the will to power, and nothing besides. And you yourselves are also this will to power, and nothing besides. To learn to see, to accustom the eye to calmness, to patience, and to allow things to come up to it, to defer judgment, and to acquire the habit of approaching and grasping an individual case from all sides. This is the first preparatory schooling of intellectuality. One must not respond immediately to a stimulus. One must acquire a command of the obstructing and isolating instincts. Every animal instinctively strives for an optimum of favorable conditions in which fully to release his power and achieve his maximum feeling of power. Every animal abhors equally instinctively, with an acute sense of smell higher than all reason, any kind of disturbance and hindrance which blocks or could block his path to the optimum. Man, the boldest animal and the one most accustomed to pain, does not repudiate suffering as such. He desires it, he even seeks it out, provided that he has been shown a meaning for it, a reason for suffering. The meaninglessness of suffering, and not suffering as such, has been the curse which has hung over mankind up to now. Every great philosophy so far has been the personal confession of its author and a kind of involuntary and unconscious memoir.